They cornered him at the edge of the howling abyss, laughing as the scrawny, bloodied boy plummeted into the suffocating darkness. They thought they were culling the weak, purging their pack of a useless runt. They didn't know. The chasm wouldn't kill him, it would awaken the dormant bloodline of the Lycan King they all feared. The northern winds of the Oakhaven territory were unforgiving, but they were nothing compared to the cruelty of the Iron Ridge Pack. In a society where brute strength dictated survival, 19-year-old Wyatt was considered an abomination. While the other young men of the pack had shifted into massive, thick-furred wolves by their 16th winters, Wyatt's beast was a tragic, stunted thing. When he shifted, he was barely the size of a malnourished coyote, his ribs jutting sharply against a patchy ash-gray coat. He was the pack's punching bag. The Omega not by submission but by a forced brutal hierarchy. Wyatt had no family name. He had been found wrapped in tattered linen by the frozen riverbanks 18 years prior, kept alive only because the former Alpha believed killing an infant would anger the forest gods. But the old Alpha was dead, and his son Declan now ruled the settlement with an iron, blood-soaked fist. Declan was a towering brute of a man, wide-shouldered and vicious, whose wolf form was a terrifying mass of dark russet fur. Scrub the blood from the courtyard runt, Declan sneered, kicking a wooden bucket of freezing water over Wyatt's shivering form. And if I see a single speck of crimson left before sundown, you sleep in the pig pens again. Wyatt didn't look up. He bit his cracked, bleeding lip, dropping to his bruised knees in the mud. The icy water soaked through his threadbare tunic, biting into his skin like needles. "Yes, Alpha," he muttered, his voice hoarse. Watching from the timber balcony of the main lodge was Genevieve. She was the pack's lead huntress, a woman of fierce beauty and even fiercer instincts. Her auburn hair was braided back, her sharp eyes tracking Wyatt's trembling hands as he scrubbed the cobblestones. Genevieve hated the cruelty, but she was trapped in her own political cage. She was betrothed to Declan, an arrangement meant to secure the loyalty of the hunting faction to the new Alpha. Why doesn't he just run? Genevieve thought, her chest tightening with a mix of pity and frustration. She had secretly left scraps of roasted venison near Wyatt's sleeping quarters more than once, but she dared not intervene publicly. To defy Declan was a death sentence. Yet whenever she looked at Wyatt, she noticed something unsettling. Beneath the dirt, the bruises and the subservience, his eyes, a striking, unnatural shade of deep gold, held an ancient, smoldering defiance. He wasn't broken. He was waiting. The catalyst for Wyatt's ultimate downfall occurred 3 days before the first major blizzard of the season. A royal envoy from the Silver Crest Kingdom, the sovereign rulers of all wolfkind, had been passing through the neutral territories nearby. Tensions were high. King Leander, the mythical Lycan monarch who ruled from the distant capital, was rumored to be dying, and his armies were scouring the continent for his lost heir, stolen during a rebellion 2 decades ago. That morning, the butchered body of the king's emissary was found at the edge of the Iron Ridge borders. The pack was thrown into a panic. If the Lycan King's guard believed Iron Ridge was responsible, they would be slaughtered to the last pup. Declan needed a scapegoat, and he needed one fast. Wyatt was dragged from the kitchens by his hair, thrown violently onto the muddy floor of the assembly hall. The entire pack surrounded him. "Mart, we found the emissary's silver dagger hidden in the hay of the Omega's bed," Declan bellowed, pacing before the crowd. He held up a blood-stained blade, the crest of the Lycan King gleaming in the torchlight. "This wretched stray brought the wrath of the Silver Crest upon us. He sought to steal the envoy's gold and botched the job." "I didn't do it," Wyatt spat, coughing up blood as Declan's boot connected with his ribs. A sickening crack echoed through the silent hall. "You know I didn't. I haven't left the settlement in weeks." "Liar!" yelled Garrick, Declan's hulking second-in-command. Who else but a cowardly rat like Omega would stab a man in his sleep? Genevieve stood in the front row, her heart hammering against her ribs. She looked at the dagger, then at Declan. She knew Declan had led a border patrol the night before. She knew Declan despised the Silvercrest's taxation. Declan had murdered the envoy to steal the tax silver, and he was framing the weakest link to cover his tracks. She opened her mouth to speak, to stop this madness, but Declan's cold, warning glare locked onto her. "Speak, and you die with him," his eyes promised. She swallowed hard, stepping back. "The punishment for treason against the pack and endangering our lives is death," Declan announced, a cruel smile stretching across his scarred face. "But I am a merciful alpha. I will give him a head start, a traditional hunt." The pack erupted into cheers. "It was a blood sport. Run, little stray," Declan whispered, leaning down so only Wyatt could hear. "Run toward the howling abyss. Let's see if your pathetic wolf can outrun mine." The forest was a blur of skeletal trees and biting white snow. Wyatt ran until his lungs felt like they were filled with shattered glass. The freezing wind whipped his face, his bare feet leaving bloody footprints in the powder. Behind him, the terrifying howls of the hunting party echoed through the pines. They weren't just chasing him, they were playing with him, driving him in a specific direction. He tried to shift. He pushed past the pain and forced his bones to rearrange, but the transformation was agonizing and weak. He collapsed into the snow as a frail, ash-gray wolf, his paws sliding desperately on the ice. He was too hungry, too battered. Reverting to his human form, Wyatt dragged himself forward using the trunks of the ancient trees. The howling abyss was less than a mile away, a massive, seemingly bottomless tectonic rift that bordered the eastern edge of the territory. The river that fed into it plummeted into absolute darkness, creating a deafening roar that swallowed all sound. "There he is!" Garrick's voice boomed through the trees. Arrows zipped through the air. One grazed Wyatt's shoulder, tearing through his tunic and slicing his skin. He stumbled, crying out as he hit the frozen earth. He scrambled up, adrenaline masking the searing pain, and burst through the tree line. He skidded to a halt. The ground dropped away completely. Before him was the howling abyss, a gaping maw of jagged black rock and roaring white water, shrouded in thick, freezing mist. Wyatt turned around. Emerging from the tree line were 5 massive wolves, led by a monstrous russet beast. Declan, the alpha, shifted back into his human form, naked and steaming in the cold air, a wicked hunting knife in his hand. Garrick and the others followed suit, laughing as they surrounded the boy. A moment later, Genevieve broke through the trees, breathing heavily. "Declan, enough!" she screamed over the roar of the chasm. "He's cornered. Just exile him." "You don't have to do this." Declan ignored her, his eyes locked on Wyatt. "Exile leaves room for revenge, my sweet Genevieve, and we can't have the Silver Crest Guard finding a living witness, can we?" Wyatt backed up, his heel sending a spray of loose gravel over the edge. He looked down into the swirling mist, then back at his tormentors. For the first time in his life, the fear vanished. The golden flecks in his eyes seemed to ignite, glowing with an unnatural, terrifying brilliance in the dimming light. "You're a coward, Declan," Wyatt said, his voice eerily calm, cutting through the wind. "You rule by fear because you know you are weak." Declan's face twisted into a mask of pure rage. With a feral roar, he lunged forward, driving the hilt of his heavy hunting knife straight into Wyatt's chest. The sheer force of the blow lifted Wyatt off his feet. Genevieve screamed. Wyatt felt the ground disappear beneath him. The world tilted upside down as he tipped over the edge of the cliff. The laughter of the pack faded, replaced by the deafening rush of the wind and the roar of the deep earth. He was falling, plunging hundreds of feet into the blackness of the abyss. He hit the icy subterranean waters with bone-shattering force. The impact should have killed him instantly. His ribs snapped, his lungs filled with freezing water, and he sank into the crushing depths. The darkness closed in. This was the end. the scrawny omega of Iron Ridge, drowned and broken in the dark. But as his heart slowed, something ancient and violent woke up inside his blood. The legends of the Silver Crest spoke of the royal Lycan bloodline gene, so potent, so volatile, that it remained dormant in half-breeds or lost children until it was triggered by the absolute brink of death. It was an evolutionary fail-safe. A king does not die quietly. Deep beneath the water, Wyatt's golden eyes snapped open. They didn't just glow, they burned like twin suns in the abyssal dark. Pain, far worse than anything Declan had ever inflicted, tore through his body. His snapped ribs didn't just heal, they expanded, thickening into massive armored cages of bone. The water around him boiled as his core temperature skyrocketed. His spine lengthened, muscles tearing and rebuilding themselves into thick, corded slabs of unadulterated power. His ash-gray hair darkened into a rich midnight black tipped with silver. He burst from the surface of the underground river, gasping for air, but the sound that tore from his throat was not a human gasp. It was a roar, a deep, earth-shaking, demonic roar that caused the stalactites above him to vibrate and crack. Wyatt dragged himself onto the jagged, rocky shore of the cavern. He was no longer 19, he was no longer a boy. He stood up, towering over 7 feet tall, his body a perfect, terrifying hybrid of man and apex predator. He looked down at his hands, watching in shock as massive, razor-sharp claws extended from his fingertips. The stunted coyote was gone. He was a Lycan. The lost heir of King Leander had been baptized in the abyss. High above, at the edge of the cliff, the pack had already begun to turn back toward the warmth of the settlement. "Good riddance," Declan spat, wiping his hands. Genevieve remained at the edge, staring down into the mist, a hollow ache in her chest. She stepped forward to look at the spot where Wyatt had fallen. Caught on a jagged root, just inches from the drop, was a torn leather pouch that Wyatt had always worn strapped securely around his neck beneath his clothes. She knelt, carefully plucking it from the root. The leather was old and worn. She opened it. Inside was a heavy, pure silver medallion. It wasn't stolen, it was incredibly old, deeply tarnished, but the engraving was unmistakable. It was the ancestral crest of the Silver Crest Kingdom, bearing the specific intricate lineage markings of King Leander himself. A crest only given by blood, right? Genevieve's breath hitched in her throat. Her blood ran cold as ice. She looked up at Declan's retreating back, then down at the medallion, and finally into the impenetrable darkness of the abyss. They hadn't just killed an Omega. They had just thrown the only living heir to the Lycan throne into the dark. And suddenly Genevieve realized that whatever came climbing out of that abyss was not going to be the boy they pushed in. The subterranean cavern echoed with the heavy rhythmic breathing of a predator newly born. Wyatt stared at his reflection in the glassy black surface of the underground river. The bruised, emaciated boy was dead. In his place stood a juggernaut of muscle and sinew, radiating a suffocating, almost magnetic heat. His senses were dialed up to an agonizing degree. He could hear the scurry of blind cave rats miles deep into the tunnels. He could smell the iron in the rocks, the ancient dampness of the earth, and, faintly drifting down from the chasm above, the scent of his own dried blood on the snow. And beneath that, the foul, arrogant scent of Declan. A low rumble vibrated in Wyatt's chest. The sheer, terrifying power of the Lycan bloodline coursed through his veins, demanding to be used. For 18 years his body had suppressed his wolf, starving it, hiding it, to protect the royal lineage from detection until it was strong enough to survive a lethal threat. The fail-safe had been triggered. He looked up at the sheer vertical rock face of the howling abyss. It was a climb of nearly 1,000 feet, slick with freezing waterfall spray and black ice. For a normal wolf, it was a tomb. For Wyatt, it was merely a staircase. He lunged at the ball. His thick, razor-like claws punched through the solid granite with the sickening crunch of shattering stone. He hauled his massive frame upward, moving with terrifying speed and agility. He didn't feel the biting cold. The furnace of his royal blood kept him burning from the inside out. With every pull, every shattered handhold, his fury solidified into a cold, unbreakable resolve. He was going back to Iron Ridge, and he was going to burn their hierarchy to the ash it deserved to be. Meanwhile, the settlement of Iron Ridge was practically vibrating with tension. The impending blizzard had brought an unnatural darkness over the timber lodge, but it was nothing compared to the dark mood of the visitors who had just reached their gates. 50 heavily armored Lycan knights of the Silvercrest Kingdom stood in perfect, terrifying formation in the muddy courtyard. Their armor was forged from dark steel, etched with the silver wolf-head insignia of King Leander. Their wolves were massive, disciplined beasts, entirely silent, radiating a lethal intent that made the Iron Ridge pack cower in their homes. At the head of the formation stood Commander Sullivan. He was an older man, his face a map of brutal warfare scars, his silver-streaked hair pulled back tightly. Sullivan was a legend, the king's personal executioner, and a man who possessed absolutely zero patience for the politics of Outer Rim packs. Declan stood on the porch of his lodge, flanked by Garrick and his top enforcers. He tried to project the imposing aura of an alpha, but next to Sullivan's hardened veterans, Declan looked like a child playing dress-up. "I will ask you one final time, Alpha Declan." Sullivan's voice was a low gravel that carried effortlessly over the howling wind. "Where is Lord Harrington, the king's emissary?" Declan swallowed the lump in his throat, plastering on a look of grieving outrage. "Commander Sullivan, it grieves me to say that your emissary was a victim of a treacherous rogue within my own walls. An Omega, a filthy stray we took in out of pity. He sought to rob Lord Harrington in the night and slit his throat." Sullivan's eyes narrowed. "An Omega bypassed my emissary's personal guards, murdered a trained royal diplomat and stole his silver. He was desperate," Declan lied smoothly. "But justice has been served. We executed the boy this morning. We threw his body into the howling abyss. We have the emissary's dagger to prove the Omega's guilt." Declan snapped his fingers, and Garrick brought forward a velvet cloth, revealing the blood-stained silver dagger. Genevieve watched from the shadows of the lodge's awning, her hands trembling inside her fur-lined pockets. Her fingers brushed against the heavy silver medallion she had found at the edge of the cliff. Her mind was racing. If she showed Sullivan the medallion, it would prove the dead boy was the lost heir. Sullivan would undoubtedly slaughter Declan for killing the royal prince, but Declan's men would likely kill her before she could even cross the courtyard. "You executed him," Sullivan repeated, stepping forward. The temperature in the courtyard seemed to drop by 10 degrees. "Without consulting the crown, without interrogating him to find out if he acted alone. It is Iron Ridge law, Commander. Iron Ridge law is a speck of dirt beneath the king's boot." Sullivan roared, his voice cracking like a whip. "Lord Harrington wasn't here to collect taxes, you ignorant savage. He was here because our seers tracked a massive surge of dormant ancestral magic to this exact territory. He was looking for the king's stolen son." The courtyard fell dead silent. The wind howled through the pines, but nobody dared to breathe. Vectron's face paled, his eyes darting nervously. The king's son." "Yes," Sullivan snarled, pulling a heavy broadsword from his hip. "And now you tell me a boy of the right age, an unknown stray, was thrown into a bottomless pit because he supposedly managed to assassinate a master swordsman? You are lying, Declan, and you are going to tell me exactly what you did to Harrington, or I will let my knights burn this settlement to the ground." Declan panicked. He looked at Garrick, nodding subtly. It was a suicide order, but Declan was cornered. Garrick roared, shifting into his massive brown wolf, and lunged at Sullivan. Before Sullivan could even raise his sword, the heavy wooden gates of the Iron Ridge settlement exploded inward. Splinters of thick oak rained down like shrapnel, tearing through the snow. The massive iron hinges groaned and snapped, flying into the courtyard and smashing into the watchtowers. The sheer concussive force of the impact threw Garrick off his trajectory, sending him tumbling into the mud. Every head snapped toward the ruined entrance. Standing in the swirling blizzard was a monster. He was easily 7.5 feet tall, a bipedal nightmare of ink-black fur and rippling silver-tipped muscle. His shoulders were broad enough to block out the storm behind him. Long wicked claws dripped with melted snow, and his jaws were lined with teeth designed to snap bone like dry twigs, but it was his eyes that paralyzed the entire courtyard. They were a blinding, incandescent gold, swirling with an ancient, sovereign power. "Gods above," one of the royal knights whispered, taking an involuntary step back. The aura rolling off the beast was suffocating. It was a primal, oppressive weight that demanded absolute submission. It wasn't just the scent of an alpha. It was the scent of a god king. All around the courtyard, the wolves of the Iron Ridge pack collapsed to their knees, whimpering as their internal instincts forced them to grovel before a supreme predator. Declan fell to his hands and knees on the porch, gasping for air as the invisible weight crushed his chest. He looked up, his eyes wide with absolute terror. What is that? Now, the mastiff beast stepped into the courtyard. As it walked, the thick black fur began to recede. Bone cracked and reshaped, muscle condensed. By the time he reached the center of the muddy square, the monster had shifted back into a human form. It was Wyatt, but he was unrecognizable. The scrawny, battered frame was gone, replaced by the towering, flawlessly sculpted physique of a warrior in his prime. The bruises and cuts were completely healed, leaving skin that looked like carved marble. His dark hair whipped in the wind, and those golden eyes locked onto Declan with the intensity of a dying star. "Wyatt," Genevieve gasped aloud, her hands flying to her mouth. Sullivan's broadsword dropped from his hand, hitting the mud with a dull thud. The commander stared at the young man, his hardened eyes tracing the sharp jawline, the distinct aggressive slope of his brow, and the undeniable blinding golden hue of his irises, a trait only ever seen in the direct bloodline of King Leander. Without a word, Sullivan dropped to one knee, bowing his head in the snow. "My prince," he uttered, his voice thick with awe. In total unison, the 50 heavily armored knights of the Silver Crest dropped to their knees, their armor clanking loudly against the cobblestones. The entire courtyard was bowing to the boy they had tortured just hours ago. Declan shook his head frantically, scrambling backward until his back hit the timber wall of the lodge. "No! It's a trick! He's the Omega! He's a runt! Kill him!" He screamed at Garrick. Garrick, still in his wolf form, hesitated, but the blind loyalty of a beta to his false alpha pushed him forward. He let out a vicious snarl and leaped at Wyatt, jaws aimed straight for the prince's throat. Wyatt didn't even shift. He simply turned his head. With a speed that blurred to the human eye, Wyatt's hand shot out. He caught the massive 500-pound wolf by the throat mid-air. The momentum stopped instantly. Garrick choked, his paws scrambling uselessly at Wyatt's iron grip. Wyatt's golden eyes flared, and with a casual, brutal flick of his wrist, he slammed Garrick into the frozen earth. The impact cratered the cobblestones, and the beta lay completely still, knocked unconscious by a single strike from a human hand. Wyatt stepped over the fallen wolf and walked slowly toward the porch. "You threw me into the dark, Declan." Wyatt's voice was different now. It was deeper, layered with a resonant subvocal growl that made the timber of the lodge vibrate. "You thought the abyss would swallow my bones." Declan drew his hunting knife, his hand shaking so violently he could barely hold the hilt. "Stay back. I am the alpha of this territory." "You are nothing," Wyatt stated coldly. With a pathetic scream, Declan lunged forward, thrusting the knife toward Wyatt's chest. Wyatt didn't dodge. He let the blade strike his pectoral muscle. The heavy steel knife snapped cleanly in half, the shattered blade tinkling onto the wooden floorboards. Declan stared at the broken hilt in his hand, his mind shattering along with it. Wyatt grabbed Declan by the throat, lifting the towering brute off the ground with one hand as easily as if he were holding a rag doll. Declan kicked and gurgled, his face turning purple. "You murdered Lord Harrington," Wyatt said, his voice carrying over the silent crowd so that every knight and pack member could hear the truth. "I saw the envoy's ledger in your private study when you sent me to clean it. You knew Harrington was getting close to uncovering your illegal toll roads. You slaughtered him, stole the tax silver, and tried to bury the truth by tossing me off a cliff." Sullivan, still kneeling, looked up, his face hardening with rage. Treason against the crown. Wyatt tightened his grip slightly, watching the life begin to fade from Declan's arrogant eyes. It would be so easy to snap his neck. It was what Declan would have done. It was what Declan deserved. But Wyatt remembered the cruelty, the arbitrary violence that had defined his life under this regime. If he killed Declan in cold blood, right now, he was simply replacing one tyrant with a stronger one. Wyatt released his grip. Declan crashed the floorboards, coughing up blood and gasping for air, clutching his bruised throat. "Your alpha is broken," Wyatt announced, turning his back on Declan and addressing the Iron Ridgeon pack. "He rules through cowardice and deception. He is no longer fit to lead." Wyatt looked down at Commander Sullivan. "Commander, bind him in silver chains. He will be dragged behind your horses back to the capital, where he will face the king's justice for the murder of an envoy. Let the sovereign courts decide his fate." "With pleasure, Your Highness," Sullivan growled, rising to his feet and signaling his guards. Two massive knights stepped onto the porch, violently hoisting a sobbing, ruined Declan to his feet and dragging him away. The courtyard was still. The blizzard raged around them, but the storm within the pack had settled. They looked at Wyatt not just with fear, but with a profound, terrifying awe. From the shadows of the porch, Genevieve stepped forward. Her head was bowed, avoiding his gaze. She walked until she was standing just a few feet from him, then dropped to her knees in the mud. She reached into her pocket, holding up the tarnished, heavy silver medallion. "I found this by the edge of the cliff," she whispered, her voice trembling. "It belongs to you, my prince." Wyatt looked down at the woman who had secretly left him food when he was starving, the only person in Iron Ridge who had shown him a sliver of mercy. He reached out his large, warm hand, gently wrapping around hers to take the medallion. "Rise, Genevieve," Wyatt said softly. She looked up, startled by the gentleness in his tone. She slowly got to her feet. "Iron Ridge needs a new leader," Wyatt said, his golden eyes scanning the terrified faces of the pack. "Someone who understands the value of strength but does not use it to crush the weak. The Crown formally recognizes you, Genevieve, as the new alpha of this territory." Gasps rippled through the crowd. A female alpha was rare, but dictated by a royal Lycan, it was absolute law. Genevieve's eyes widened in shock. I don't know what to say." "Thank you. Rule well," Wyatt nodded. He turned the medallion over in his hands, feeling the intricate engravings of his true family. Past the broken gates of Iron Ridge toward the south, where the capital city of the Silver Crest Kingdom lay waiting. For 18 years he had been a scapegoat, a punching bag, a scrawny wolf meant to die in the shadows. He slipped the heavy silver chain over his neck. The metal settled against his chest, warm against his skin. "Commander Sullivan," Wyatt called out, his voice echoing with undeniable authority. "Yes, sire. Prepare the men," the Lycan Heir commanded, his golden eyes reflecting the swirling storm. "We are going home. What would you do if the people who bullied you suddenly realized you were the one meant to rule them all?" Wyatt's journey from a battered scapegoat to the Lycan King's Heir proves that true power can be kept in the dark forever. If you loved this story of vengeance and royal blood, smash that like button, share it with your pack, and subscribe for more epic werewolf tales.